presentation is entitled Man as a Wanderer in the Secular World and His Final Destination. And I'm going to use the ideas of St. Augustine in this presentation. First, let me define what I mean by secular, because we've been talking about secularism for the past several days. While there is ongoing discussions on the meaning of secularism and secularization, and of course the discussions whether the present world is indeed becoming more secular, this paper will be using the term secular world in the sense that the world represents the mundane and the temporal aspect of reality. The world is secular because it is temporal, physical, and material. The world will not last forever. The notion of the world as secular is contrasted to the notion that the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God, is a spiritual world, in that it represents the divine or the transcendent aspect of reality. The spiritual world, or the kingdom of God, is eternal, as contrasted to the finitude of the world. The things in the world that are associated with the divine, or the spiritual, or the transcendent, are considered to be sacred. The world then, while being secular, also contains the sacred. The sacred are those elements, could be objects, institutions, practices, values that, although found or expressed in the world, nevertheless are associated with the spiritual or the divine or transcendent. Of course, nowadays, the sacred can also be reduced to a mere secular thing, resulting to what people may call the desacralization of religion. The world then, while not spiritual or divine in itself, contains both the temporal objects and the sacred objects. It is in this kind of world that, although secular and yet contains the sacred, that man lives and expresses his thoughts, his aspirations, or some philosophers would call his subjectivity, and conduct his daily affairs. Now, man's relation with this secular world. Man is that being where the spiritual and the physical or corporeal aspects of reality are integrated. Man is composed of both the spiritual and the corporeal, meaning we are spirit and the body. The body and the spirit have their respective powers and capacities. The soul operates through the mediation of the faculties, and the two highest faculties or powers of the spirit are intellect through reason and rational volition through the will. It is through reason and will that the spirituality of man is actualized, and through which man realizes himself. The body is the biological part of man and is the basis of his physical function. Of course, aside from this biological and physical function, it is through the body that man externalizes his thoughts and expresses his subjectivity and rationality. It is through the body that man relates with the world. In the secular world, therefore, man is able to express both his spirituality and his corporeality. While the world contains physical objects, some objects, as I've already mentioned, are considered to be sacred or spiritual. Because man, through his spiritual aspect, that is his rationality, is able to interpret these objects in the context of his relationship with what he considers to be spiritual, or sacred, or divine. But this interpretation of man of the sacredness or spirituality of certain objects in the world is not based on some purely subjective interpretation, because there is in fact a spiritual reality upon which these objects are interpreted as sacred and divine. Hence, man's relationship with the world and his interpretation of the sacred and divine have both subjective, what is interpretation, and the objective aspects, reality. Now, since man is both spiritual and corporeal, and the world can be understood both temporally and spiritually, next question is, what would be the final destination of man? Is this world, this temporal world, his final destination? Is this world the basis of man's ultimate happiness and fullness? Now, the ultimate end of man. In the Nicaean Ethics, Aristotle says that all actions are aimed at certain end, or good, and he identifies the ultimate end as happiness. Man by nature desires happiness, but the question is, what constitutes the ultimate happiness of man? It is in this sense that I use St. Augustine. According to St. Augustine, and of course the other Christian philosophers, man's ultimate destination is God. And that means the transcendent or the spiritual. St. Augustine insists that although man achieves a certain degree of happiness in the physical things, in the physical world, for these physical things are also reflections of God's goodness, man cannot conceive of true happiness without the permanence that only God can assure. It is impossible to attain true happiness here in this world, for the world is finite and can only provide man with things that are temporary and fleeting. God, as a supreme object, is the natural goal of man's activity, the ultimate resting place of man's love. And it is for this reason that when St. Augustine ultimately found God, then he said, "Our heart is restless until it rests in thee." However, man is also considered as a material being, and therefore he desires the material happiness and temporal peace. On the other hand, there is also the spiritual man who loves God, seeks spiritual happiness and eternal peace. These two loves, according to St. Augustine, produce two types of human beings and two types of states. And based on these two loves, the two cities are built. The earthly, which is built up by the love of self to the contempt of God, and the heavenly, which is built up by the love of God to the contempt of self. St. Augustine further writes, "In the city of the world, both the rulers themselves and the people they dominate are dominated by the lust for domination. Whereas in the city of God, all citizens serve one another in charity, whether they serve by the responsibilities of office or by the duties of obedience." End of quote. For St. Augustine, the two cities based on the two loves of man cannot be separated. The good and the bad citizens are mixed. The real purpose of the citizens should be to attain harmonious living with each other and peace among them. St. Augustine emphasized that the earthly dwelling is temporal and is but a shadow of a higher dwelling. He is firmly convinced that the earthly society must follow the ideal heavenly society, that the human society must live in the harmony and peace of righteous men under God and in God's presence. Through the process of time and by God's grace, the increase in religious conviction will diminish man's desire for the earthly or social life. However, the heavenly city uses the earthly peace in the course of its earthly pilgrimage. It cherishes and desires as far as it may without compromising its faith and devotion the orderly coherence of man's wills concerning the things which pertains to the mortal or finite nature of man. Earthly peace is important in the attainment of heavenly peace. Hence, it does not mean that the two loves, the two desires, the two cities are irreconcilable. The temporal society or the human society is a preparation towards the ultimate goals, towards the discovery of faith, hope, and love of God through other people. Now I go to my next point, man as a wanderer and his ultimate end. As we have seen, for St. Augustine, man is an intermediate creature between the brutes and the angels, meaning he has the body and he has the spirit. A rational animal with a body and soul, guided and ordered by the loving providence of a personal God. Now, since man is a being of flesh and bone and exists and lives in a space-time continuum, man does not only live in the world, he is in fact a man of this world. And because of his corporeality or materiality, he also loves or desires the objects in this world. The goodness of creation is also the goodness of God. But for St. Augustine, although man is in this world because of his corporeality, he is not just a man of this world. Man, because of his spiritual nature, will not find the ultimate happiness or fulfillment in the temporal or the secular world. The secular affairs of man are mere manifestations of his fundamental reality, the state and the desire of his soul for happiness. But it is the spiritual in man that gives integrity and meaning to his personal life and human destiny. The passing events in this world are mere prefigurations or foretastes and symbols to prepare man for his eternal destiny. Therefore, for St. Augustine, it is the divine man that directs himself towards his ultimate end. and destiny, which is heavenly happiness. The divine image is the compass of human life. However, with the fall of the first man, this divine image was shattered by sin, and man became lost and disoriented. He became a stranger to his own nature, a stranger to his destiny, a stranger to himself. He becomes a wanderer in this world. St. Augustine compares man's spiritual disorientation to a group of wanderers who wanted to return to their father or to their homeland. And he writes, "Suppose then we were wanderers in a strange country and could not live happily away from our fatherland, and wishing to put an end to our misery, determined to return home. We find, however, that we must make use of some mode of conveyance, either by land or water, in order to reach the fatherland, where our enjoyment is to commence. But the beauty of the country to which we pass, and the very pleasure of the motion, charm our hearts, and turning these things we ought to use into objects of enjoyment, we become unwilling to hasten to the end of our journey, and becoming engrossed in the fictitious delight, our thoughts are diverted from the home whose delights would make us truly happy." So, as a wanderer, man experienced the attractions of the world. But the world can appear simply as an illusion, giving it the glitter of the ultimate end. And man, in this wandering, can actually embrace the world. But at the same time, as a wanderer, man experiences the attraction of the transcendent. Temporarily, fleetingly, man would want to extend it, but as long as he is in the temporal world, he can only extend it to a certain extent. Sooner or later, it will end. So like a wanderer, man seeks to return to his fatherland or homeland, which is the kingdom of God. Man's spiritual journey is often distracted by the things of this world, and man sometimes is continually entrapped in its temporal and material grandeur. One of the obstacles that can befall man in his spiritual journey is to love the world over God. Man could be so absorbed in the passing grandeur of the secular world to the point of loving the creatures more than the Creator, not knowing that the material and temporal grandeur of the secular world is nothing but an imperfect reflection of God. Man's excessive love for the world is the love that degrades man's own nature and true destiny. God, who is the end and destination of man, is the source of true happiness. The striving after God is therefore the desire of beatitude. The attainment of God is beatitude itself. As God is the highest beatitude or happiness of man serves as a fundamental criterion for moral valuation. Man, however, cannot ascend to God without being detached from creatures or worldly things. Virtue entails an intellectual and moral purification through which our intellect and will are progressively detached from every sensible object. Man cannot ascend to God if he is attached to worldly things. He must abandon all attachment to worldly happiness. The virtue are thus important, for they are those that temper the worldly desires of man. Through the virtues, man is able to detach himself from the heavenly pleasure, or for the worldly pleasures. The goal of this detachment and purification in this life is the future life, where man can have a loving contemplation of God. My final remarks. St. Augustine is telling us that while we naturally fall in love with the temporal order or material happiness, we need to realize that this is not our final destination. The ultimate end of our journey is union with God. What is needed, therefore, is to avoid the distractions, the glitters of this world, and focus on the final end of our journey. We cannot be absorbed by the trappings of this world. Though we cannot deny the fact that like the wanderers, we get distracted, for indeed the world has its own grandeur. We need to realize that these are temporary and will not last forever. One way of resisting the temptations of the secular world is to practice the virtues of simplicity and humility. The heart that has so many desires of this world can be very restless and distracted. Avarice, which could make man desire excessively the objects of the world, should be countered with simplicity. Pride, which is the cause of the fall of Adam, could lead to arrogance, which should be countered by humility. Simplicity prevents man from overindulging in the world, and humility restrains man from transgressing the will of God. And probably with these two virtues, we will arrive at our final destination. Thank you very much.